with talk number 5 in our Back to the Basics series for this January. If you're just finding this talk, I suggest that you go back onto the YouTube channel and look for the first talk of the year, the first Sunday in January 2022, and start and go through them in sequence. But we started by laying out theory, and I mentioned that Dr. Holmes said the way that we build faith in anything is we start with a theory, and then we apply that theory in practice, in experiments. We test it, we tweak it, we look at it and see how, if this is true, how could it be true, and how could I work with this to prove that it's true, and all of these things that a curious person would do, a scientist would do. We all grew up with the story of Isaac Newton sitting under the apple tree, and the apple fell and hit him on the head, and he wondered why. Why did that apple hit him on the head? And through that line of inquiry came up with the law of gravity. Now, of course, it didn't exactly happen that way, but it's a story. It's a story that people remember. But if you think about this, gravity has always existed. Long before people existed, gravity was, and long after people will be gone, gravity will still be. And people took it for granted. They never doubted gravity. They never were afraid that one day gravity would stop working and they would float off the earth. They probably never thought about it. It's just part of existence. And they knew enough about it to cooperate with it. They could divert the course of streams, and they could use the water flowing downhill, and they could use it to irrigate their fields, or they could use it to turn water wheels or fishing wheels or things like that. Here in where I live in the southeastern United States, the streams are full of things called fishing weirs, W-E-I-R-S, and what these were just simply piles of rock. The people who lived here thousands of years ago realized that if they just took rocks and piled them up into the narrow stream and made sort of an inverted V with a very narrow opening at the top, that the migrating fish had to pass through that V. And they could just stand there and catch the fish, made the fishing easier, But the water was going to flow, and the water was going to flow through there, and the fish were going to follow that stream back upstream, and they were going to have to go through it. Now, if you went to any of these people and said, can you explain to me what gravity is? Can you explain to me how gravity works? Do you have the mathematical capability to describe it as Newton did? Excuse me. They would say, no, of course not. I don't know what you're talking about. They didn't have to. See, they didn't have to have the mathematical language. They didn't have to have much of a theory, but they knew that it worked. They knew that it worked. And they never stopped to question that it wouldn't work, see. But it was this curiosity of the mind of Isaac Newton. It was this curiosity that led to a deeper inquiry into what gravity is and why it works. And it's interesting to me that was several hundred years ago. And even though we can understand well enough how gravity works to be able to send us one of our spaceships, a satellite, to a distant planet such as Jupiter, and put it into orbit and know where it's going to be and know exactly how gravity is going to act upon it, we still don't know what it is. We still don't know what it is. See, Newton said, well, there's some kind of a force between objects that have mass that pulls them together. And that understanding worked well for hundreds of years, but it didn't work well all of the time. And different scientists over the years kind of grew on that idea, kind of worked with that idea. And eventually we got to Einstein, and he changed it. He changed it to relativity. He explained gravity in terms of his papers on relativity. But it was his inquiring minds, it was his questioning mind that led to say, well, why doesn't it always work? Why doesn't our understanding always fit what we see? maybe there's another explanation. See, and part of the way that he worked was imagination. And I read a little bio piece on Einstein not too long ago, and said that when he was studying, he studied books written by an author who used thought experiments, which by that I meant things that you couldn't really test yet. They didn't have to wait to test them, but they could suppose. And one of them would be what would happen if you were moving along at the speed of light and you turned the light on. What would happen to that light? Einstein worked with that later, and he came up with his ideas of relativity, and that the speed of light is constant. And then other people went and tested that. They went and figured out ways that they could test that to see if it was constant. So we start with a theory. We come up with experiments. We observe facts and data, repeatable facts and data in the scientific process. And we take what we get, we take the results, and we go back to our theory, and we look at our theory and we say, well, did I get the results from this experiment that my theory predicted I should get? Yes or no? And if no, if yes, it means that you may be right. If no, then you got a different issue there. See, if no, you can say, well, maybe I didn't do the experiment right. Maybe the experiment wasn't designed properly. Or maybe my theory is wrong. But it's this idea of starting with a theory and testing, and going back to the theory and readjusting the theory if necessary, and testing again, or readjusting the test and testing again, and over and over and over. It's this line of inquiry by which our knowledge grows of our physical sciences. And Dr. Holmes asks us to take that same idea, that same approach, and take it into the realm of what he would call the metaphysics, the metaphysical. And he said if there's any field whatsoever that requires testing and demonstrations, demonstrable proof, it is this field, because it seems less tangible to people. It just doesn't seem like hard science. Like if I was talking about the laws of electricity a couple of weeks ago, everybody would nod their head because we're all familiar with electricity. Nobody questions that when you turn the light switch on, the lights are supposed to come on, and usually do. Nobody would question the fact that if you go over to the technical school and take a course in how to be an electrician, that you too could do that. Anybody who studies the law and learns how to cooperate with it can work with it. Yet the very thing that electricity is intangible. If I asked you to explain to me how I can take a magnet and wave it past a coil of wire and cause an electric current to flow in that wire, most of us wouldn't know. It's intangible to us. What is magnetism? That is intangible to us. We play with magnets. When we were kids, we played with magnets. We had a lot of fun with them. But really, what is it? It's intangible, you see. Yet we can demonstrate its action, even though it's intangible. And what Dr. Holmes is telling us is that, and we started this idea last week, that it's very important to find a way to test the theory simply being that there's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. In New Testament terms, it says, pray believing in your heart that it is so and it shall be so. Pray believing. In the Old Testament it says, as a person thinks and believes in their heart, so it is. In Buddhism we get the idea, it is done, everything that you have experienced is a result of your thought. And then from the Stoic philosophers and from the more modern day, I guess we would say modern day, from the 1920s or so, from the self-help authors, we kind of get this idea, what the mind can conceive and believe, the mind can achieve. So we have these different ideas coming to us from different places at different times, but they seem to be pointing back to the same origin, which is change your thinking, change your life. It is done unto you according to your belief. Now, if you've ever been into a city and you've seen the big glass trucks arrive, it looks like an A-frame truck and it has these huge glass windows on, the store windows, and you've ever watched how they put those in. They have special handles with suction cups on them. And they can take the suction cups and they can attach it to the glass, and they can use these handles to move the glass, put the glass in place. Some of the suction cups now, they're on mechanical arms. I think they do car windshields the same way. They use an arm on a suction cup and it just rotates around and puts the windshield right in place on your car. It allows one person to pretty much manipulate that windshield and get it in your car. Now, the importance of the handle is that without that special handle, without that way to get a grip on something that is otherwise ungraspable, they couldn't move that. So we need a handle, we need a tool, we need an approach to this thing called spirit, this thing called God. And different religions and different philosophies in different ways in different times, they each have a starting place. They each have a place that they will start their inquiry. And I call that the handle. Right? We think of the four blind men, the parable of the four blind men and the elephant. They each had a grasp on a different part of that elephant, but none of them understood what the entire elephant was. None of them could see the whole. So they had to work with what was there. They had to work with what was in front of them. That was their handle. In Buddhism, they talk of the raft. If you were on one shore and you wanted to get to another shore, you might build a raft and you might paddle across the body of water. The raft is the tool that gets you from here to there. It is the teaching. It is the very teaching itself. But once you get to the other side, you don't need the raft anymore. Once you get to the other side, we're told it'd be silly to put your raft on your back and carry it around walking inland, telling everybody, hey, look at my raft, look at this beautiful raft that I built. Isn't it wonderful? It served its purpose. It served its purpose. You're on the other shore, you can let go. So different philosophies, different teachings, they start with the raft. They start with the handle. They start with some place to get a hold on this intangible thing we call God, this intangible thing we might call metaphysics. Excuse me, I need a lot of water this morning. And we take whatever handle, whatever starting place that is most appropriate for us, and we explore that. See, we work with that. Now here's kind of a problem that we have as human beings. We like to flit from one thing to another, like the grasshopper mind of the Buddhists. We flit from one thing to another thing to another thing to another thing, and we don't stay with any one starting place long enough to make much progress. The analogy I use is, when I was a Boy Scout, we learned you could start a campfire with a magnifying glass, and all you had to do was take the rays of the sun that were there, the power was already there, and you could use it to start a fire. But you had to bring it into focus, and you had to maintain that focus. You could take that magnifying glass, and if you moved it all around, here, there, everywhere, up, down, left, right, you'd never start a fire. You would never demonstrate the principle that a magnifying glass can start a fire if you did not hold that magnifying glass steady. Steady. So what we're getting to here is the entry point that we are using, the place that we are starting, is this idea that there's this power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. Ernest Holmes called it the law of mind. There's something that responds to us according to our belief. Other teachings tell us that. We have some experience with that in our own life. But now we want to go further with that idea. So when we first come to this, we may be like the people who understand that water flows downhill, but don't really know why, and perhaps don't give it much thought. And now we want to step into the shoes of a curious inquirer like Newton. Dr. Holmes said that we are explorers. We are spiritual explorers we are spiritual adventurers in the unexplored territory of mind. So think about this. Stoics said it, the Old Testament says it, Buddhism says it, New Thought says it. How would you know? How would you know if there's a power in the universe that responds to you according to your belief? Now you can look around you and you can observe, and that's good, and we should do that. But we can test it ourselves. And in order to test it ourselves, we will need some type of a technique, some type of a process, some type of a repeatable process that we can use over and over again. And we can adjust, and we can tweak, and we can try to make it better, and we can see, well, I got good results when I did this, and I didn't get such good results when I did that, and we can adjust the way that we do these things. But we need to have something that's going to give us consistency. Now the talk that we're going into today is the 5 steps of spiritual mind treatment. May not finish it all today because there is a wealth of information here. If you are near a center for spiritual living, you can sign up. There's a curriculum that runs probably 26 weeks or more just on this topic. There are some centers that offer online courses in this that you can sign up for. Frederick Bales wrote a little book, a 12-lesson home study course on science of mind. And Ernest Holmes himself wrote a 1-year study course, a correspondence course. Before there were centers all over the world that could teach, people would sign up and take a correspondence course. And this is the old type of correspondence course. I don't know if anybody else ever took one, but I sure did. But you sign up and they send you a lesson, and you read the lesson, and then you write out your homework longhand with pen, paper, and you stick your homework in an envelope and you mail it back to the teacher. The teacher grades it, and then they send you back the graded homework with the next lesson. And that's the way Ernest Holmes' correspondence course worked. There was 52 lessons in it. And that entire course in I think it's a 6-book format, that's also available from the Centers for Spiritual Living website and bookstore. There are many, many videos on YouTube on spiritual mind treatment and how to do it. There's lots of teachers teaching. In fact, this morning when I was looking at YouTube, there's a 20-minute talk. Ernest Holmes had a radio program that lasted about 20 minutes, and there's a 20-minute talk by Ernest Holmes himself on the topic of spiritual mind treatment. So the technique that we use, the process that we use to get ourselves cooperating with this power, to test this power, to see if it's really there. If it's not there, then why waste your time? Dr. Holmes says this. And if it is there and you can't use it, you're wasting your time. You need to find a more effective, a more efficient way to work with it. Now, keep in mind that what Dr. Holmes is telling us is this law of mind, as he called it, this power that responds to us according to our belief. It doesn't matter what technique you use. If you arrive at the belief, the power will work. See. So any prayer that has been answered, the prayers get answered, is because the one praying has arrived at a new level of belief. if we go to some sort of a ritual or some sort of a ceremony, and in that place we arrive at a new level of belief, we may have a change in our life. I was watching a program one time on Lourdes, the Shrine of Lourdes, where people from all over the world go to touch the holy water there in belief that it has healing powers. And they do, they have healings. And there was one story about a man who went there who had been, he was a soldier in the Italian army. It wasn't wartime, but he was a soldier in the Italian army. And he was discharged and told to go home because he was dying. And the one thing he wanted to do before he died was he wanted to go to this shrine at Lourdes, because when he was a young boy his mother always told him about it. And he said he didn't go there necessarily looking for a healing, but he went there anyway. And he went back home and he was waiting to die, and he didn't die. And he finally went back to the doctors and he said, it's taken a long time. you told me it was going to be over quickly. And they did more x-rays, and whatever the condition was that he had was gone. And they had the x-rays, they had the before and they had the after in the show. And I'm assuming that the show was not a sham, not a fraud. But they had the x-rays, the before and the after. And they showed that this man had what had been believed to be an incurable disease was gone. It had left him. So we hear these anecdotal stories, and there are records at Lourdes. There are people who keep these sorts of records. We hear these stories of people who have spontaneous healings by all sorts of means. And it points to the fact that there is something there. You see, there is something there that functions according to our belief. That's the starting point. That's the handle. That's the entry place that we use to start our inquiry into what is this thing called God? What am I in relation to this thing called God? The reason that we have this process, the reason that we have this technique that we can use over and over and over again, is because this idea itself of what belief is and what faith is an intangible, is a nebulous idea. And what people believe is at times unknown to them, unknown to their conscious mind. What I believe is largely unknown to my conscious mind. But if there's a power in the universe that is responding to me according to my belief, that includes what I consciously know that I know. Right? There are things that we know and we know that we know, and there are things that we know that we don't know that we know. There are, Jung called them subliminal. There are ideas down below our level of consciousness, and yet there's this power constantly acting through them, acting upon them. Right? That's the premise that we start with. That is the hypothesis that we start with, and that is what we are trying to prove or to demonstrate. So when you first start hearing of these things, there are some terms that are different, and we naturally have to ask, why are they different? And I think it's important that we touch on those a little bit as we get more and more into these steps. There's a saying in the Bible, you can't put new wine into old skins. And there's also in the New Testament, it says, there comes a time when you can't mend the house anymore, you can't repair the house anymore. You have to scrape it down to the foundation and start all over again. So you and I, part of our learning process, when we receive new information, we try to associate it with something that we already know. We try to take the new wine and put it into the old skins. Now sometimes this works, especially if you have a good teacher, because they lay things out for you in a manner, in a lesson plan, so that the new thing builds off of the old thing. So when we were little kids, we went to school and we learned numbers. We learned simple things. 1, 2, 3, and then the mysterious 0. Which some teachers, math teachers would tell us wasn't discovered until the year 1200 or something, which I personally find hard to believe. But nevertheless, that's the way it was taught. But we start with numbers, you see. And then we start manipulating numbers in arithmetic. We learn how to count, we learn how to add, we learn how to subtract, we learn how to multiply, we learn how to divide. Now if we didn't know anything about numbers, we couldn't do the simple arithmetic. But once we can do that, you see, then we can move on to algebra. And algebra is kind of taking numbers and letters and combining them together. Now we couldn't do algebra if we didn't understand arithmetic. We couldn't do arithmetic if we didn't understand numbers, and so on, all the way through geometry and trigonometry and calculus and God knows what. So we have to have a place to start, and then we have to build on. That is our human concept of knowledge. But this idea that you can't put new wine into old skins, that there comes a time when you can't build on anymore, that you have to wipe down to the foundation. What that is telling us is that some ideas are so radical, so different, that we have to start new with them. We have to start over with them. We have to take everything that we ever knew and we have to be willing to set it aside. And when we do that, we need new terminology. We need new words to describe things. When the automobile came along, it was an evolutionary step. They took the buggy and they took the horse away from the buggy and they put an engine in there and they called it horsepower. Essentially, the idea was the same, just didn't need the horse anymore. But they developed new things. They had to invent new things. And with those new things, we got new terminology, because there just were not words in the old terminology to describe the new thing. The transmissions, for example. So Dr. Holmes uses the term treatment, and he didn't invent that word. That existed before he came along and he studied. But we use the word treatment, and at times we qualify that, we say affirmative prayer. And many times new people would come into our church or center and say, what is this treatment thing that you're talking about? Why can't you just call it prayer? And there's a reason. There's a reason. People have a preconceived notion of what prayer is and how prayer works. And if we said, well, let's look at prayer, everybody says, oh, prayer. See, I know that. Ever since I was a little kid, mom would come and tuck me into bed, and we would say a prayer. I know what a prayer is. But that preconceived notion of what prayer is depends on the pre-existing beliefs of what God is. Remember week 1 I said, what's your idea of God? Of what God is and how God works. Now, many ideas of prayer, many of the concepts of prayer, is that somehow prayer is asking a God, or begging to a God, or beseeching a God, or trying to convince a God to do what we want God to do. Joel Goldsmith calls that trying to bring God down to our level. And this ties into this concept then of a God who can send us trials and tribulations, but if we pester it enough, it will take those same trials or tribulations away from us. And in some concepts, people don't believe themselves worthy to speak directly to God, so they go through an intermediary, through an angel or a saint, you see. But it's still the same idea. If you convince the angel or the angel or the saint goes to God, and they convince God to undo that which God did to you in the first place. And we want to stop and question that concept. Is that your concept? Perhaps not. Perhaps it is. But if I use the word prayer, whatever your concept of prayer is comes into the equation. And what we want to do is we want to wipe this idea down to the foundation and start all over again with a new term called treatment. One of the first books I read on the effectiveness of prayer, I mean, this is a normal, natural question. Does prayer really work? Does prayer do anything except make the one praying feel better? Holmes called that a salutary effect. He said that's good as far as it goes, but that's not what we're looking for. We are looking to prove to ourselves, to demonstrate to ourselves that there's a power in the universe that responds to us according to our belief. That's what we are trying to do as explorers, as scientists. He called them religious scientists. So I'm trying to think of his name. I know him as Cherry Parker, but it might have been William Parker. I think it was William Parker and Elaine St. John's wrote a book called Prayer Can Change Your Life back in the late 50s. And I think Parker's background was he was a psychologist, and he got interested in how when people's ideas changed, their lives changed. I'll just toss out here as a placeholder, what is the placebo effect? Change your thinking, change your life. But Parker studied this, and he did. Now it's not, you would look at it today and you would say it's not a very scientific study. There, if you look at, did he have the right controls in place and all those, certainly there is a lot of room for improvement in his methodology. But nevertheless, it's a very, very interesting book. And by the way, he went on to become a divine science minister. I think as a result of this, his inquiry, or perhaps his inquiry was because he was already studying to become a minister while he was a psychologist. I don't know. But two of my teachers, Reverend James and Jonah Gia, up in Durham, they knew him. They knew him out in California. They would tell stories of him. But at any rate, he wrote this book, Prayer Can Change Your Life, and they looked at different people, and they looked at, the conditions that they had, and they looked at people praying for them, and did they get better, did they not get better, those sorts of things. I think Larry Dossey has done similar work, probably in a more modern era. But one of the links that I sent in last night's email was from Dean Radin, R-A-D-I-N, Dean Radin, PhD. And he wrote a book called The Conscious Universe, and I put the link to that. It's on Amazon. I put a link to the book on Amazon in the email last night. And he did a lot more modern studies, a lot more modern research on the effectiveness of prayer. And of course, all of these different studies come out and say, yes, something's happening. But the point that Parker made that I found so fascinating was he said, it depends on the one praying, and it depends on your concept of God. In other words, all prayers from all traditions, from all beliefs, from all time, some are effective, some are not. And Dr. Holmes asks us this, why are some effective and some not? Maybe we can explore that and find out. And Parker said, it really depends on the concept of God that the one praying has. So if one is praying and thinks, well, God may or may not answer this prayer, because God may have a different idea or a better idea, or God sent them this for some reason and isn't going to take it away. If the one praying has a concept of God along those lines, then the prayer may not be effective. So this is why I started week 1. What is your concept of God? Now we're talking about your concept of prayer. So we wipe this down to the foundation. We don't try to put new wine into old skins. We don't try to say, take this thing and reframe it in all of the ideas that you have about prayer, but be willing to start over again. Be willing to begin at the beginning. Be willing to have a Zen mind, a beginner's mind. So the term treatment, instead of saying I'm going to pray for you, by saying I'm going to do a treatment for you, you would say, well, wait a minute, what's that? What are we talking about here, you see? And it forces that conversation that says, I believe there's a power in the universe that responds according to our belief. And I believe that it is that power that works through prayer. But not any prayer. Actually, it works through every prayer according to the belief of the one praying. But not every concept of prayer approaches that certainty. Dr. Holmes has a chapter in a textbook on the difference between prayer and treatment. You know, is there a difference? He says, well, prayer can be treatment, but not all prayer is treatment, because not all prayer starts with a concept of the unity with God. Not all prayer starts with the assertion and the assumption that the universe is good and only wants for us what is good, and does not send us that which is not good, does not try to punish us, does not try to teach us. So we use the word treatment because we are treating the causes which are in consciousness. In consciousness. We are treating our consciousness to the truth. That is what we are doing. We are deliberately following a process that does two things for us. The first is just the very act of doing the treatment raises our belief to a new level. And the second thing is that it starts in motion this power that responds to us according to our belief. And it sets it in motion to continue changing our beliefs. If you want a snowball to roll down the hill, of course you got to start at the top of the hill. But if you want a snowball to roll down the hill, you don't have to run along with it. You know, if you get snowball going, the law of gravity will do the rest. It will continue to go, and it will continue to gather up more snow, and it will get bigger and bigger and bigger as it rolls down the hill. When you do your treatment, you are starting that law in motion on your behalf for your intention, but it continues to work to change your beliefs for you. And remember, what I say is that we have things that we believe and we know, and we have things that we believe that we don't know. They are not aware, they are not present in our conscious awareness. Something has to work through those. Something has to work to start to change those. Now we know that what we call our subconscious mind is subject to our conscious mind. By constantly repeating things, for example, we reprogram our subconscious mind. Through hypnosis, for example, we can start to see a change in our subconscious mind. So when we are treating, we are treating our subconscious, if you will, to the truth. We are actively putting new things into our subconscious, or as Thich Nhat Hanh said, we are watering the good seeds. But we are also starting that snowball rolling down the hill. We are also invoking this power to help produce whatever change or changes as needs must be in our consciousness for the unfoldment of the demonstration. Now the second term I'll talk about, and we'll close here for today, we'll pick up next week. As I say, this one topic itself could take a year of classes to expand on. And all I want to do today is whet your curiosity. The second term that is new to people is the term demonstration. So you might say an answered prayer. But again, that invokes people's pre-existing ideas of what prayer is. And how does a prayer get answered? You know, in the movie Oh God, Jim Carrey, you know, is God sitting there reading emails saying, okay, you get this, but you don't get that? How is prayer answered? So we try to take some of those old ideas and replace them. And some of them are in fact superstitious. And we just try to replace them. The prayer is answered through belief. The process of changing belief, the technique we use for changing belief, is a process of spiritual mind treatment. And what we are demonstrating is the activity of that law. The demonstration is the result. It is the visible result that we have changed our belief and this power has worked through our belief. We're demonstrating the law. The demonstrating is the unfoldment of the change in consciousness. So when I was a kid working with little breadboards, experiments in electricity, we had one of those little 50-in-1 science projects, and you take the little battery and the little buzzer and the little doorbell button and wire everything up, and you push the button and the buzzer would ring or the light would light, whichever experiment you were working on. You might say that buzzer buzzing was the demonstration of the law of electricity. And it was also confirmation that I had wired the circuit properly. My battery was good, the wires were in the right place, the switch was good. I did everything I needed to do, excuse me, in order to demonstrate that yes, there's something magical in that battery. I'm just teasing. There's something in that battery, you see. It is a storage house of electricity. And when I wire the circuits up correctly, I can demonstrate that. But not only can I do it, anybody who will take the time to wire those circuits up correctly can demonstrate that the law of electricity works. So we call it treatment for two reasons. One is it gets our head out of trying to make it fit into our preconceived notion of prayer, which may or may not agree. We call it treatment because we are treating our consciousness to the truth. We are starting with the truth of what God is. We'll get into that in step 1 next week, recognition. And we call it demonstration because we are demonstrating, I'm trying to think of the words of textbooks, the power of spiritual thought force, I think is what the way the textbook says it. We're demonstrating the law. We're demonstrating that if you change your thinking, you change your life. Now, as I said at the beginning, this is the entry point. This is the handle. This is where we try to grab onto the intangible. Excuse me. The intangible thing called God. But as we begin this exploration, you see, as we start to see these things unfold, we might get hung up for a while and say, oh, I can use this to get more stuff in my life. I can use this to get a better job. I can use this to get a better car. I can use this to get more money. I can use this to get a better spouse. All of these things, you see. And it's not about getting stuff. Now, Holmes said we might get stuck there for a while, but we'll get over it. And we'll move through it, because at some point we say, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Why does this work? As St. Paul said, who am I that God is mindful of me? What is this thing called God? What am I in relation to this thing called God? Why does this even work? And that takes us to a deeper level, right? So now we are paddling our raft across the waters. We start out by saying, yes, it's there. But you have to know that it's there. You have to believe that it's there. You have to prove that it's there. Or there's no sense going any further if you're going to use this as an entry point into your inquiry, into your study. But now we start to get into the deeper questions. See, Dr. Holmes tells us, with all you get, you must first get God. You can't have the demonstration unless, in some degree, you have changed your concept of God. So it is a beautiful place to begin. It is a beautiful place for inquiring minds to begin. But the importance is practice, practice, practice. When we were studying Thich Nhat Hanh last month in the Zoom group, he constantly uses the term practitioners to talk about the adherents of Buddhism. It's not just enough to know the theory. It's not just enough to read the books. They have to sit down and practice. You can read every book about meditation that was ever written, but if you never sit down to meditate, what's the use? You can read every book and listen to every talk ever given about the law of mind and the power that responds to us according to our belief. But if you never sit down and practice, what's the use? So I invite you this week, let's close for this week, and I invite you to consider, are you curious? Are you an adventurer? Are you a practitioner? Are you willing to work with this power and learn how to work with it more efficiently? And I'll leave you with this. If there is this power in the universe that responds to you according to your belief, it is always working. Always working. Whether you believe it to be working or not, it is always working. And since it is always working, it is always demonstrating in your life. And the conditions in your life then are an outpicturing of your beliefs, of your consciousness. So if these theories are correct, then you are already experiencing the consequences of the activity of this power upon your belief. And now it seems it only makes sense to cooperate with it consciously rather than unconsciously. We'll pick it up next week. We will continue on with the steps of treatment. Have a beautiful week. Talk to you then. So it is.